Good morning, everyone. We'll ask everybody to take their seats. We're going to get an on-time launch here this morning. I think most of you were here for dinner last night. If you're not with us, I'm Craig Fuller, and the co-chairman of Redbird Flight Simulations. My co-chairman and, more importantly, the founder of Redbird, Jerry Gregoire, is with us as well today. And the whole Redbird team really to spend time interacting with you over the course of the day. I think, though, we're going to start with a really terrific program that you'll enjoy. One of the things that we've always tried to do with the migration is to provide speakers who will stimulate, educate, entertain a little bit. That's particularly the panel after this one. Entertain a little bit, but get you thinking about some of the challenges involved in flight training. As those of you who were here last night heard me say, that this is very much meant to be interactive. We come here with great enthusiasm to give you a chance to see what Redbird is doing today and where it's headed in the future. But we also come here to learn and understand what you're facing and coping with and how we can be better partners. That's the spirit of today and tomorrow, and we hope you'll take advantage of talking to all of us from Redbird about what you're doing, what you like, what you'd like to see as we go forward. Our first speaker this morning is somebody very dedicated to the world of business and general aviation. He's with the Boeing company, and Boeing has been a great leader in focusing on the need for flight training and the development of pilots across the country and around the world, and for good reason, because they make wonderful aircraft and they need more and more pilots to fly those aircraft around the world. And so Boeing has been a great partner for some time with Redbird, with AOPA when I was there, with AOPA today, and we very much appreciate their interest in migration and taking some time with you this morning. We have a great speaker. William Ampofe is with us. He's a vice president for business and general aviation at Boeing, and he has this sort of audacious goal to ensure that Boeing is in fact leading the market in both of those areas, business and general aviation. He has had a great career at United Technologies before joining Boeing, but he's someone with a great deal of insight into the kinds of things we're facing as we go forward. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming William to the stage.
Make sure I'm mic'd up. Can everyone hear me? Okay, well, thanks for the kind introduction, Craig. Thanks to you, Jerry, Craig, Todd, for the invitation to come here. This is a fantastic event. I think this is year number 9, and we at the Boeing Company, through our Jeppesen business, have been partnering with Redbird for the better part of the last 10 years to really educate and also increase the participation in the aviation space. And I think it's an exciting time to be in aviation. There's a lot of growth that's happening, for sure, not just North America, but globally. And within the Boeing Company, we're doing a lot of things that are helping us to increase our focus on business and general aviation. So what I thought I'd do is give a little bit of an overview of our business, some of the things that we're doing within Boeing across the enterprise, and I don't know, I think Craig said educate, stimulate, and entertain. So you could tell me which piece of that I have fulfilled at the end of my presentation here. But all kidding aside, we'll open it up for some Q&A at the end of this. So definitely want this to be interactive. I was talking to Todd earlier, and I know you had an event last night, and he said about 70% are first-time attendees of Redbird. So I, raise my hand and count me in that number as well. So I'm really excited to be interacting with you all here today. So why don't we just get going? So when you think of Boeing, what do you think about when you think of Boeing? Okay. Right. So airlines. So when we think about Boeing, obviously we, produce commercial aircraft that we all fly in on a daily basis, military, fixed wing, as well as rotorcraft. We've got a phenomenal space division as well. But did you know that we are now one of the preeminent leaders of services for business and general aviation? And I'll talk a little bit more about what we're doing to build that business and make it really a One Boeing presence. So if you look at Boeing, we just recently celebrated our 100-year anniversary in 2016. So we're now a couple years into what we're deeming second century. So we've got a lot of second century initiatives across the Boeing company. But if you look at our commercial business, is number one in the industry. We had a record year last year, 800 plus aircraft deliveries. It's a $60 billion business and really growing at a rapid pace. We've got our defense business, which is also growing at a rapid pace. It's about a $23 billion business. We had a record year in terms of winning some major franchise business in our defense business last year. We won the trainer, which is the picture here. So this is going to be the platform for training for armed services for the next, certainly as long as I'll be around. We won the MH-139 and the MQ-25. So 3 major franchises within the defense business that is going to be around for us, not only from an OEM perspective, but from a services perspective in years to come. And then the third piece, which I'll talk about, and which is the division that I'm a part of, is Boeing Global Services. So Boeing Global Services, we stood up in July of 2017. And this really represented a fundamental change for us at Boeing. So we formerly had commercial and defense businesses which manufacture these fine products that we deliver. And then we had our services businesses that were embedded within. And what we decided is we wanted to put an emphasis on the total life cycle of the business, for our customers primarily, and start to take more of an active role in making sure that we didn't have the bureaucracy of the OEM business. Services moves at a much different pace than that of a OEM manufacturer. So we wanted to extract our services business and have a standalone division and unit within Boeing. And this really marked the biggest structural change for the Boeing company since the McDonnell-Douglas merger. So just think, 20 plus years. So it was a pretty big deal, but it was something that we felt compelled to do. So a little bit about Boeing Global Services. It's a $17 billion business. We're headquartered in Dallas, North Dallas and Plano. We've got over, by last count, 23,000 plus employees. And, our focus is really about being agile, disrupting the industry, and making sure that we're, streamlined in our approach to, addressing our customer needs. I can't tell you how many times, I go to customers and they say, hey, it's been a challenge to deal with. I don't know who to go to. I got to go through all these layers. We're getting really focused around our customer base and delivering fit for purpose business solutions. So we're really excited about it being 2 years into our journey. So in terms of the structure of our business, when we stood up Boeing Global Services, we took an opportunity to develop 4 primary go-to-market businesses. The commercial, which is obviously our platforms and services, 737, 787, 777, the like. But we also took an opportunity to stand up business and general aviation, and that's where I came into play, to lead this business and bring together what was formerly embedded in our subsidiary businesses, Jeppesen, Aviall, to a large extent, and put a renewed focus on it. And I think that's worked out well for us. We've also done some inorganic activity, which you probably all have read and heard about, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Our U.S. government services is our defense, and then obviously our international, which is selling to international governments and allies. But in terms of the structure of our business, we have 4 main capabilities that we go to market, which is our supply chain, parts distribution, engineering, maintenance, and modification, digital solutions and analytics. We talk about the pace of change that's happening in the industry, and it's so fast, right? The technology is advancing, and us as consumers and customers in many ways, want to make sure that we have access to the data so that we make informed business decisions around our fleet, whether you're a large carrier or a corporate operator, an FBO, you know, or even a private pilot. You know, there's information that is coming off of these aircraft that we want to make sure we capture. And our Jeppesen business fits within that digital solutions and analytics. And then the last piece is training and professional services, which is, I'm sure a lot of you are interested in, because we partner with a lot of the flight schools. We provide curriculum, simulator training for large commercial, but we recognize that we play an active role in making sure that we're not only attracting, but developing and retaining the next generation of aviation. I call them enthusiasts, because I think we've got a pretty cool industry. So what I'd like to do is maybe cut to a video, and maybe it'll highlight some of the cool things that we're working on before I go to the next stage of the presentation.
Augmented reality can help resolve in-service issues
I think we gotta.
so that aircraft spend less time in the hangar and more time flying.
We'll have to replay that. I don't think there's volume.
The Internet of Things.
You can read lips? Okay, you're better than me.
Airlines assets, promoting continuous learning and improvement.
Synthetic vision is the next generation of flight briefing and ensures our pilots fly with confidence.
We don't just use technology, we drive it.
We don't just practice innovation, we live it.
Augmented reality can help resolve in-service issues quickly so that aircraft spend less time in the hangar and more time flying.
The Internet of Things informs novel insights across all of an airline's assets, promoting continuous learning and improvement.
Synthetic vision is the next generation of flight briefing and ensures our pilots fly with confidence in all conditions.
Big data empowers artificial intelligence, which we use to drive efficiency gains across the entire industry.
As both an operator and a service provider for unmanned aerial systems, we are leading the way to a safe integration into the airspace.
Image recognition with cameras on and off the aircraft can give our customers more control over day-to-day operations.
Around the world, our Boeing Global Services Labs are fostering innovation daily in a fast-paced and collaborative environment.
At Boeing, we're not just trying to predict the future.
We're building it together.
So what that video highlights is, again, just some of the technologies that we're investing in and bringing to the market, not only addressing large commercial aircraft, but all the way down to the GA space, and we're really excited about that. So what I'd like to do is maybe take a deeper dive into kind of the state of the business from a business and general aviation perspective. And when I think about BAGA, that's how we refer to it within Boeing, I thought it important to kind of give you a little history of the businesses that make up this segment, and really starts with Jeppesen. So the Boeing company acquired Jeppesen back in 2000, and we've got roughly 3,000 employees throughout the world. We're based here in Denver, just right up the road here, and it's a tremendous leader in navigational charting solutions, optimization tools for crew and airlines, and with the acquisition I'll talk a little bit about later, we're bringing even more technology to the table to improve and enhance the flying experience all around safety and proficiency for our customers. So it's a great business located here, but the software developers are really done, development work is done throughout the world. Then in 2006, we bought Aviol. Aviol is a global distribution business, one of the leaders in aerospace for engine distribution as well as part distribution, chemicals, standards, hardware. So if you were an FBO, an MRO, an operator, Aviol's really a one-stop shop to provide global reach. They've got extensive repair capability, wheel and brake repair capability, hoses, and the like, and they're based in Dallas, and they too are a global entity, which is about 1,600 or so employees. And then we started to get sporty. I told you we entered our second century in 2016. Last year was probably one of the most transformational years for us within Boeing, and in particular in global services. We purchased KLX, formerly KLX, which is now Boeing Distribution Services, Inc., which is a really good complementary business to our Aviol business. It also is a distributor, but this is a little different in that what they do, they are embedded in many of the OEM providers around the world, including Airbus. So they not only distribute parts, but they're providing point-of-use hardware and kitting to those operators and airlines and MROs throughout the world. So a lot of our competitors are now our customers, and we've been able to maintain that business, and in fact, we've grown it since we've made that acquisition, but we're really excited about that. They're headquartered in Miami and about 2,400 employees. And then lastly, which is something probably near and dear to all of your hearts, is we acquired ForeFlight. ForeFlight and Tyson and his team have done a phenomenal job of not only being ambassadors for the industry, but they've brought technology to the market at a rapid pace. If you think about how their market share has grown over the last few years since they stood up that business, we initially started with a partnership, having their mobile applications and our data coupled together. And when that happened, right around the time that I started in 2017, the industry was, resoundingly about time. This is a great marriage, if you will, of two technologies, two leading technologies and capability. And in fact, that really led us to the acquisition, which happened last year. So we are already starting to integrate some of our development and bringing some of the technologies that we're bringing to bear together. We've got MBAA coming up next week. We'll have a few announcements there, so no spoiler alert, but that'll be good for us, and we're really excited about the businesses coming together. So this is what makes up business and general aviation within Boeing Global Services. So combined, about a $3 billion plus business, and you could see the number of employees, and it's a truly global business, and we're doing some pretty amazing things. So in terms of the portfolio areas, we've got technical operations, which is primarily our parts and supply chain business. As I mentioned, the distribution, the MRO services. We've got our OEM services, which is primarily driven by our KLX business. And then we've got our flight operations, which is the Jeppesen and the ForeFlight portfolio of companies. So really a comprehensive suite of offerings that span from Boeing Business Jet in the business aviation market all the way down to general aviation rotorcraft. So we've got a pretty comprehensive suite of offerings now. So what I'd like to do is talk to you a little bit about the market as we see it. I know you all read the paper and internet, and we have our annual outlook at Boeing that we deliver at the major air shows. We did it at Paris Air Show earlier this year, and I also delivered an outlook at Oshkosh EAA earlier this year. So I just want to reiterate, just in terms of the size of the markets that we operate in. So business aviation, the 10-year market outlook. So today, about 31,000 in the active fleet, and we're looking to grow that. Modest growth, but at 1.5%. But what we're seeing is there's retirement of aircraft, but there's also introduction of new aircraft that are being currently certified. So that bodes well for us from a services perspective. And from a digital perspective, many of these aircrafts, as they're being introduced into service, they're being rolled out with our Jeppesen and ForeFlight products inside. So that's exciting for us as we partner with the major OEMs to bring enhanced functionality and features to the market. General aviation, which by far is the largest segment, roughly 300,000, growing at about a 1% CAGR over the same 10-year horizon. We're active participants there. And then on the civil rotorcraft space, which is really the first time that we're publishing this, this is growing at about 1.5%. So if you think about not only the parts to service the existing fleet, but the technology and the digital solutions that are in the helicopter market as well, we're playing an active role. So if you think about the fleet in terms of the global nature of where in the world it is, we'll talk about North America first. That's the majority. Between North America and Europe, you've got about 80% of the world's fleet. And you can see the breakdown there between rotorcraft, turboprop, business jet, and piston. What I'll tell you is North America, highly penetrated market. I'm not an economist, but there's some rumblings about the economy and downturns in the economy. We have not seen it yet. I could tell you it's been a fairly robust market for us. But then you get to Europe. Europe is growing at about a 1%, but there's a lot of the whole global economic activities in Europe. You've got Brexit. You've got Germany. There's some uncertainty there, and we have seen in certain regions this uncertainty and how it plays out, more so in the business aviation space where they're not buying and flying as much, but also as it relates to airspace and opening up airspace, it's put a little bit of a constraint on the market. Then if you add in Latin America and APAC, so the four of these regions combined are about 90+% of the global fleet around the world. We're particularly excited about Latin America. I think you all know that we're partnering with Embraer, and I think that's going to give us access to these markets, which we typically have not been in those markets in the past. So we're really excited about that. And there's a fair amount of growth that's happening in Latin America. And Asia Pacific is another growth area that's been a focus for us. And I'll say a lot of activity, whether it be the trade discussions or the financial situation within APAC, and China, and they're going through the first time since they've opened up their economy, they're going through a little bit of a downturn. So we are in the business and general aviation space usually a leading indicator for the global economy. So we are starting to see some downturn there, but we are diversified in our portfolio such that we feel we can insulate ourselves from that. And then if you look at Africa, Russia, China, and the Middle East, that makes up the remaining 10 to 12% of the world's global fleet. And some of these areas are underserved today, notably Africa. Middle East, we've got a pretty good presence, but their CAGR is going in a negative direction. And Russia, these are all areas that we're looking to prosecute in terms of opportunity. So again, globally, it's about a 350,000 aircraft fleet actively throughout the world. So let's talk about the growth and how it kind of impacts the industry. I was having a couple conversations earlier about the ecosystem. I think the growth in the business is something that we all get excited about. We all should be excited about, certainly most recently. But when you think about the commercial growth, which we talked about, and there's 500,000 commercial aircraft, and this is the first time that there's been that many. But over the next 20 years, we're forecasting that there's going to be a need for another 40,000 aircraft, right? So as an OEM, as we deliver those aircraft, we're going to need pilots to fly those aircraft, right? So I think there's a huge need, as you can see throughout the world, and in particular in Asia Pacific, for pilots. And it's a little bit of there's a lot of downward pressure on the industry right now, and not just, you know, the infrastructure, but it's the people, so the talent piece. And that's where I think that we have to play an active role in the participation piece, which is a big part of what we're partnering with Redbird. We're partnering with a lot of flight schools and providing curriculum, courseware, looking at new ways to deliver the training in the space. And at the Boeing Company, we're also having early outreach programs, because it really starts young. Like I said, it's the talent, it's the pipeline. So there's an infrastructure piece, but there's also the talent piece that we're heavily focused on. So a lot of personnel, so 804,000 pilots, right? So think about it, that's roughly 40,000 a year that's going to be required in that time frame. The technicians, 769,000 technicians. And I think this is an area where we need to work on the narrative around the ecosystem. You know, technician, it's a career path, right? You know, I think we went through this whole evolution of white collar, blue collar. This is sophisticated stuff, right? So we've got technology, some of it was highlighted in the video, but we're really trying to focus in on the new technology and the capability that's coming to market and getting out there to attract talent to fill this pipeline. And then the corollary is the cabin crew as well. So a fairly strong demand, and we've got I wouldn't call it a crisis, because I think we've got some really good efforts underway to help stimulate what is required on a go-forward basis. But I thought this was a compelling chart to share with you all, and the numbers are really staggering. Okay, so what are we doing to support this? So you know, we're committed to supporting the life cycle of our customers, whether you're in the first flight in the right seat of a Cessna 172 all the way to the final touchdown of a captain of a 787. We are vested at the Boeing Company to ensure that we're facilitating this pipeline. A couple of initiatives that we sponsor, Young Eagles through EAA. We've been doing this for a couple of years now, and that's truly a successful program. We're investing in STEM programs. We invested in over 291 STEM programs last year, and that's really geared at the elementary all the way through high school. We're partnering with some of the universities, Embry-Riddle, North Dakota, to attract and maintain. And I think there's a financial piece to help support through scholarships as folks look to go to flight school, which quite frankly has been one of the prohibitions. It's, you know, unfortunately, the educational pathway for pilots are not that of someone going to school for business. And the way that the educational system is structured and the financing is very different. So we're trying to change that through public policy in Washington and, you know, Gamma, AOPA. So we're on the front line with some of our partners to help change that so that it could help influence the pipeline. I mentioned our flight schools and our partnership with ATP. You know, ATP provides more than 7,600 pilot certificates annually. Embry-Riddle, my brother is a graduate of Embry-Riddle, one of the renowned schools for aviation. And then the last thing is around staying sharp, right? So we often think about pilots in terms of the education, the proficiency, and the competency. And as we look at some of the things and the areas that we've partnered with, Pilot Proficiency Center at AirVenture. This is something that Jeppesen, Hartzell, and Redbird drove very hard. And, you know, we served over 3,500 pilots in 1 week during this program last session, and that's pretty encouraging. We're now exploring ways to make this a year-round program, right? So that, you know, I know we've got a captive audience at EAA, but how do we forward deploy this so that we keep this going on a year-round basis? AOPA Rusty Pilots program. You know, in partnership with AOPA, we've helped over 10,000 pilots start flying again. And it's been a tremendous initiative in partnership with AOPA. So these are just some of the highlights of the things that we're doing. and playing an active role in and partnering with the likes of Redbird and others, and I think we're going to continue to do more. We have, with tax reform at Boeing, we've taken an opportunity to invest over $100 million back into the community to support educational programs, and this is but one of those programs that we're supporting. And we're looking to make this an annual, yearly commitment from our perspective. So I thought this was important to share with you. So as we look to the future, we've got a lot of different things that are on our roadmap, both organic and inorganic. You know, I've highlighted the ForeFlight acquisition, which was huge for us, and we're already starting to see the benefits. And hear, more importantly, hear from our customers how important this is. And we want to make sure we keep the pace of innovation. We don't want to stifle that because they've done a fairly, actually a remarkable job at innovating and bringing technology to the marketplace. And we want to, you know, I use the term reverse integrate. So how do we use some of the best practices that they've brought to the marketplace and integrate it into our business? So we're excited about that. E-commerce and digital expansion. The video highlighted some of the things that we're doing in the AI space and AR, VR, but from a commerce perspective, we've got to behave more like a B2C company. And business and general aviation, unlike some of the other areas within Boeing that are more B2B, we're more B2C. And what I've tried to put an emphasis on is, you know, we want to interact in this space much like we do in our own personal lives, right? With the Amazons of the world where it's, you know, search, find, transact. So we're making some investments in our digital capability that's going to help us not only reach new markets, but also help the customer experience. And then the last thing is enhancing our customer intimacy. Jeppesen has done a great job through their Connect conferences, and I'm sure some of you have attended them in the past. But we take an opportunity, whether it be at MBAA, EAA, Oshkosh, or through our Connect conferences, to have customer advisory boards so that we're a lot more intimate with our customers around development of products and solutions, but also enhancing them to make them better. I really wanted to get away from doing point solutions where, you know, one person wanted it, but we weren't able to scale and meet the needs of the masses that way. So we've been highly successful in bringing folks together, and in some cases, competitors together, and that's the beauty of it, right? We kind of put down our badges and have a candid, open conversation about what's the right thing for the industry at large. So we're going to continue to do more of that as we go forward. So I think that concludes my formal presentation. Again, I don't know, entertainment, educate, stimulate. It's early in the morning. Some of you have coffee, some don't. So, but I hope we could have a Q&A where we could address any of your questions that you may have. Yes, sir.
Do you see any potential integration between Jet FD Pro and ForeFlight?
You know, I think so the short answer is we're looking at all of the products that we've been developing in parallel, and integration is obviously one of the reasons that we bought ForeFlight. And so we're looking to take the best of the best. So if you think about competing, you know, technologies and capabilities, we're going to look at, you know, which one is further along in terms of the development cycle, which ones are further along in terms of adoption, and then we're making decisions on sunsetting some products, integrating others, or, and quite frankly, transitioning to one over the other. So the short answer is yes, we're looking at the portfolio holistic in that respect. Okay. Yes, sir. Jerry.
Thanks. Hi. I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but I'm not really that sorry. Could you talk a little bit about curriculum development? What you're looking at maybe over the next 3 years in terms of curriculum development that might be accessible for general aviation flight schools and other institutions that are providing flight training?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So a part of our portfolio, and training and professional services, but even before we stood up, built Boeing Global Services, we made an acquisition of Peter's software at Deutschland, which is in Germany. And they've got a tremendous platform delivery system for curriculum and courseware. So what we're trying to do is make sure that we're transitioning all of our legacy curriculum, upgrading it, putting it on that platform from a delivery system perspective, not only from the flight courseware, but also technicians. So we're looking at both, you know, the pilot as well as the technician for maintenance training as well. So we were hoping to have that, you know, fully potted and delivered at the end of this year, but we're pushing that out to the first quarter of next year. So we recognize that there's an opportunity there, and we're pulling the different pieces that we already have and figuring how do we partner with the flight schools to provide that in a comprehensive and more agile delivery system component. Jared?
Let me, if you don't mind, follow up. There are about 4,000 flight schools in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
There are 12,000 school districts in the
Mm-hmm.
U.S. Most of them have more than one high school. All of them are being funded for STEM programs that are aviation related. Our experience has been that they've got the money to buy the tools for training, and certainly Redbird's, a lot of Redbird simulators are going to schools now and
Mm-hmm.
facilities like this, but they're being put in the hands of people that have never been in a small airplane to use. And creating I guess the question really is how far down market might we expect you guys to invest to develop curriculums for these kinds of STEM programs, which seems like a natural for Boeing,
Mm-hmm.
frankly.
Yeah, so the answer again is yes, we are, and that's why this business is in place, because if you think about commercial, they're not really focused there, right? But for us, using the capability that we have for within the Boeing company, we're looking to go a little bit further downstream to meet those needs and demands of the market. I don't have a specific date for you, so that's the putting on the spot, right? So I'm not going to do that. But it's something that we're focused on, and I appreciate your question. So I'm going to take that back to the team to figure out where in our roadmap deployment is that, and if to the extent we could pull it to the left, which is already under work. Okay. Yes. Yes, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How do you see the development and future cockpit automation affecting the footprint of flight crews actually in the cockpit? Are we going to be going closer to single pilot operation with a ground-based backup pilot, or what comments do you have on the future of that?
Well, I'm not an expert on that, but I could tell you Williams' view of the world. I think we're a little bit of ways off, right? Especially as there's a not renewed, but there's a great emphasis on safety right now. And, you know, we see it, you know, we stood up an arm within Boeing called Boeing Horizon X, and that's really focused on, you know, new technology, unmanned, you know, eVTOL and the like. And I think a lot of the players in the space have underestimated the whole regulatory and the certification process, right? It's not like, okay, go make it and it's 6 months to certification. I think, you know, as we kind of prove out this technology, I think we'll eventually get there. I think it's a disruptive way to look at things in the industry, and we're certainly looking at it. But I think we're a ways off, quite frankly, is my view. Yes, sir.
I think it's great we're talking about STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. I've already seen an expansion of that. They've added art to it, 1A. If we really think that through a little bit more, I think we would add aviation to that. Science, technology, engineering, art, aviation, and math, because aviation brings all of this together.
Mm-hmm.
STEAM with 2 A's.
That's a perspective, yeah. No, and I agree. I think historically, you think about STEM, I don't know how many, you know, there's a lot of engineers within our company for sure, and other companies within aerospace, and I think historically that's been like the bedrock for getting into the space. But I agree, I think there is an opportunity for us to look at it more holistically, if you will. So, thank you for that comment. Hey, David.
So one thing we talked about earlier, William, was the need to get a more diverse population interested in aviation, including and specifically females.
Yeah.
So could you elaborate a little bit on what Boeing might be doing about that in the future?
Yeah, and I didn't get into the details there, but as a part of our scholarship and funding for the talent, we've carved out money to be really specific about creating gender equality, ethnicity. How do we bridge that gap? So we've given money. I think we announced at Oshkosh we supported some scholarship in conjunction with United to support women in aviation and have provided scholarships for their flight training and educational needs. We're also supporting other programs to get at inner city. How do we start to attract those from different ethnicities? And I think that's a big part of it. And we're an inclusive culture at Boeing. We certainly want our employees to look like the customers and throughout the globe that we represent. And I'll tell you, it's been a little discouraging for me, being minority in this space. There's not a whole lot that I see, right? And I think there's a need. I think it starts with seeing people that look like them in leadership positions that can inspire and bridge the gap to make it exciting. And I think we got a leg up from a gender perspective. Now that next frontier is look at more ethnic diversity.
My name is Peter Dittmer. I'm in your backyard at Central Washington University. I'm the department chair there. And we have a robust flight program. And one of the things we're using is the 141 Jeppesen and their materials. And probably for the last 10 years, I've been really wanting Jeppesen to update their materials. And this is probably just some more of information. Now that Boeing has acquired Jeppesen for the last couple of years, do you see them putting resources into JEP and on the training materials that seem to be lacking in the past?
Yeah, the answer is yes. So first of all, so JEP's been a part of Boeing, but I think what's changed in the last 2 years is the fact that there's a seat at the table in terms of priority, right? So I think Jeppesen and some of the other businesses have been looked at as subsidiaries. And now, as we're looking at our portfolios and our road mapping, the funding, because funding is required to do some of this, whether it be human capital or other sources of funding that we've got to invest in. So yeah, we are doing that. And I see that continuing as we go into year 3 of Boeing Global Services.
I would probably speak for a lot of the flight schools, and I know for the universities, we really would like to see that. Some of the training materials were made back in the 1990s when I was like 25 years old, and now I'm 55, and I'm still looking at stuff that was done in the late 90s, and we're really, every time I talk with Jeppesen, we're in the process of doing it, but I haven't seen anything in the last couple of years.
Right, and as I was trying to answer Jerry's question, that's a piece of that as well, right? So we were trying to have that potted and deployed end of this year. Now that's getting pushed into the first quarter, but it's a priority on our roadmap to do that because there's a recognition that some of the material is dated, but also the delivery mechanism for that material is something we're focused on. So thanks for the question. Oh, back in there. Yes?
Okay. In light of what's been happening, let me preface this, I know what in any shape or form means this is criticism. Because I happen to think that what's happening with the 737 certification is not been treated well by all. But anyway, my question is, how do you see cooperation between industry and the FAA, particularly in terms of
you know, well, I should start. I can't comment on that right now. We're in a quiet period. We've got our earnings release coming out next week. So I don't want to comment on that, but I could tell you, you used the term partnership, and I think it exactly has to be that. You know, I sit on the board at Gamma as well, and up until certain, you know, activities over the last couple of years, that community was all around how do we take bureaucracy out of certification, and then you have, you know, events that happen, and I think that changes the perspective a little bit. But despite that, I think we got to continue to strengthen the partnership, educate, you know, and transparency and the like as it relates to that whole process. And that's just a general comment, but I can't comment specific to, yeah. You know, I think one thing that I've learned as a part, yes, you would think and hope and pray that there will be better partnership and collaboration go forward. But I think one of the things that we need to recognize is there's a lot of political backdrop to this, right? Especially as it relates to governing bodies throughout the globe and some of their, you know, agendas, if you will. And I think that's where we've got to look at what's best for the industry, right? So I mentioned having our customer advisory boards or some of the trade associations that we participate on. And I could tell you, the partnership and the collaboration is extremely strong there, right? And I think it all gets back to our roots and our passion for aviation and doing the right thing for the industry. And I think, you know, any time we get an opportunity to reflect and make sure that that's the agenda first and foremost, we'll start to see some of the breaking down of the barriers.
Well, William, I want to thank you. I'm over here.
Oh,
I want
over here. That's voice of
sneaking
God
up on
there,
you.
yeah.
I know. I want to thank you very much for being with us. Everybody, thank William and Popo. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
You know, since I don't have an earnings report next week, and since we're also going to do a little stage work up here, I just want to say, William, that it's always been my experience, including a good deal of time working with the FAA, that Boeing is a great partner. And you know, Washington is a place where all too often, when some correction is thought to be needed, it's an overcorrection and the pendulum swings too far. But we could not get the innovation that Boeing gives us or the competitive aircraft that Boeing produces without a very close working relationship. So I hope when all is said and done that continues. Well, now you're in for a little different kind of presentation. I paid a lot of attention when I was at AOPA to just how people received information about aviation, particularly general aviation. And it's no surprise that AOPA has, throughout its 80-year history, focused a lot on communication. In fact, when you ask members why they belong to AOPA, the top two answers are the magazines, the newsletters, on one hand, and advocacy on the other. In tough times, advocacy is first. When AOPA does the kind of fine job they've done the last few years, advocacy is second, and the publications and media are first. And so not only do people who want to enter aviation pay attention through these publications, but also the people who work in the field. Between AOPA and AvWeb and the publications that Belvoir produces, they are reaching this entire aviation community. So when you get the chance to put two editors at large together from Belvoir, in the person of Paul Bertorelli, who as an executive editor runs the gamut of contributing and communicating on aviation issues through AvWeb, through his blog, and through some of the other publications. And Dave Hirschman, who's editor-at-large at AOPA, and you know, I worked very closely with Dave for a number of years, and I still don't really know what he does, but he seems to be everywhere in aviation with every type of aircraft, locations around the world, and whether he's writing, whether he's a videographer for a day, or a podcaster for a day, he does an exceptional job. So please welcome Paul Bertorelli and Dave Hirschman to our stage for what we're calling Rumble in the Rockies.
You
Gentlemen.
take the far side. All right.
So my job is to make this conversation move. I don't think I'm going to have any trouble with the conversation part, but we've got a lot of interesting topics to go through. What I wanted to start with, we'll start with Paul, is, you know, a couple minutes on your flight experience and your perspective. How are you coming at this discussion as a pilot?
I'll answer that, but first of all, I want to tell you what an editor at large is. It's a publishing industry HR term that applies to people who are not quite bad enough to fire, but not good enough to promote, so they make them editors at large. And now we have two of us up here on the stage, so it remains to be seen whether two editors at large on the same stage can be master debaters. Let that sink in.
That's a bad. What's your language?
My perspective coming into this job is that I started flying when I was young, when I was 19. That was 1969. I got into publications and newspapers and magazines, and then drifted into combining the two, and here I am, editor at large.
Dave, you fly everything, so how'd you get involved in all this? What's held you into aviation?
You know, it was just, as a newspaper reporter, I got a ride in a typical sort of thing where the air shows come to town, they want some advanced publicity. I got a ride in a Stearman, open cockpit biplane like the one out on the ramp that Michael Maya Charles flies. And you know, and I always thought that aviation was, you had to be a master of complex machines. You had to be an engineer. You had to have a mathematical mind, and I have none of those things. But I went flying in the Stearman, and you know, we did loops and rolls and spins, and you didn't have to talk on the radio. And I just thought, why didn't somebody show me this a long time ago? This I can do. So I've been drawn to the impractical side of aviation ever since, and first through aerobatics and then, you know, I got involved in the local aerobatic club, and they needed somebody to teach aerobatics. So I thought, okay, great, I'll get a CFI and teach aerobatics. So I did that and discovered that, you know, that instrument flying was really kind of fun. It was, you get the same satisfaction out of a good instrument approach as you do from a well-flown aerobatic maneuver. So it's all just been downhill from there.
So, Dave, let's stick with you. Let's go to our first topic area. You never get a debate faster in this field, as far as I can tell, than asking the question, what kind of plane should you be training in? High wing, low wing? And in your case, especially, nose wheel, tail wheel. So let's throw the first question out there. What's your preferred aircraft for training? Dave, we'll start with you.
You know, in my mind, the perfect training aircraft should be easy to fly, but hard to fly well. And it's in my experience, airplanes like a Citabria, you know, fit that description. You know, they're robust, they're tough, they stand up to some abuse. In the technological world, you know, the SR-20, but you know, they build this talk as the Rumble in the Rockies. So I want to fire the first shot and insult Paul first, if you don't mind. Is that all right with you? Okay. How many Southerners in the audience today? I know that David Toulis is from Georgia. Michael Maya Charles is an honorary Southerner because he spent so many years in Memphis at FedEx. Any Southerners out there? I spent a bunch of time in the South. A bunch of Texans and Redbirds. We can consider them Southerners. I think they certainly consider themselves that way. And in the South, there's a phrase that always comes before the insult, and it's "bless his heart." And it's like, Paul, bless your heart. It's like you you can find the dark cloud in any silver lining. You know, you can make Eeyore seem like an optimist. You not hardly can find the fly in the ointment. You want to be that fly. So, you know, Paul's got a first-rate mind. I mean, he's a super sharp guy. He's an excellent writer. I love reading his stuff. But he reaches the most bizarre conclusions. For example, Paul, his has jumped out, he jumps out of airplanes. I mean, he's done it thousands of times. Obviously a really slow learner. He, you know, it's like, I'm an aerobatic pilot. It's like, I'm no stranger to risk, but Paul drives a motorcycle in Florida, you know, the land of the living dead. People, you know, octogenarians driving Denali's, you know, that's what he uses to, that's the place that he rides motorcycles every day, so.
This is coming from a guy who flies an airplane that was built in a basement by a guy he doesn't even know.
But it's like, I'm still flying the airplane. It's like, you jump out of it, but it's like there's only 3 things meant to fall from the sky, and it's rain, bird shit, and fools. And
he's been waiting all month to say that. He's really triggered by the skydiving thing. You know, in skydiving, we have a saying, it takes 2 days to train a skydiver. First day, we separate the men from the boys, and the second day, the men jump. You should stay with the little boys, because I know you're triggered by jumping out of airplanes. Optimism versus pessimism. I think we all know that a pessimist is a person who sees a tunnel. An optimist is a person who sees a light at the end of the tunnel. And a realist, which is what I am, sees the train. And of course, the engineer sees 3 people on the tracks. And I'm proud to be one of those people on the tracks. And my whole attitude towards all of these questions, which we'll eventually get to, I suppose, is realism. I like to look at numbers. I like to think about things logically. And I don't like to blow smoke up people's butt. It's just disappointing. So I kind of take a cynical view of things sometimes, and someone has to do that because it wouldn't be Dave.
So you've now proven that you guys are more difficult than 10 Democrats on a stage. Paul, I want to go to you. I want to go to Paul. Cut Hirschman off the coffee, if you will, and ask about training aircraft. Your preferred training aircraft.
Preferred training aircraft. First of all, it's got to have a stick. I hate yokes. Center sticks, to me, are the most natural way to fly. Don't like side sticks or yokes. It has to be kind of a 2-part question, because Dave and I probably agree, if a pilot's going to learn to fly what I call grassroots, he's not going to go to the airlines, he's not going to buy, God forbid, a Cirrus. He just wants to fly. Then a tail dragger is great. A Cub or a Super Cub or any of a number of light sport airplanes, which are just great little training airplanes. My top all-around best choice is a DA-40. It has all those requirements. It's got a center stick. It's got the technology, if you want it, all the way up to the most advanced glass panels. And it's one of the most sorted out airplanes I think I've ever flown. It's got no bad habits. Unfortunately, because market conditions being what they are, it doesn't have a big presence in the training market, but it should. It's an excellent airplane.
Okay,
Once
Dave.
again, a ridiculous conclusion based on some pretty sound logic. Okay. And skeptical is
sound
okay.
logic, ridiculous conclusion.
Skeptical is Paul talks about being cynical. Cynical is to be avoided. Skeptical is okay. Skeptical we want. Cynical, that's over the edge.
I got to be cynical because back when Dave still had hair, I learned bitterly that cynicism is the smoke that curls up from burned dreams. So the sooner you accept that and understand it, the better off you'll be.
Like I said, Eeyore is an optimist, right?
Let's go inside the aircraft for a minute, you guys. Let's talk about, so regardless of what your preference is with respect to training, let's go back to Paul. What kind of technology should be there? I mean, students are going to hopefully matriculate into pilots where they're going to see this incredible new array of avionics that's available to them. How should they be training? What should be in that cockpit?
Well, Dave had the bizarre idea that if the cockpit has technology in it, any kind of glass cockpit, any kind of autopilot, envelope protection, whatever it is, you shouldn't expose the pilot to that until he solos. Well, that's a little bit ridiculous because as instructors, we all know about the law of primacy, and my view is that you incorporate that stuff right from the beginning. And Roger Sharp, where's Roger? Roger gave an excellent talk last night on the integration of technology right from the beginning in pilot training. And I think we have to go in that direction because this technology is here to stay. We should really stop hiding from it, embrace it, and integrate it right from the beginning. Unless the pilot is just going to be a grassroots flyer, then he doesn't care about it. And as far as the technology itself, Dave and I had this discussion yesterday. It's gotten a little overcomplicated so that, you know, if you go and you fly an airplane with a G1000 NXI, which I did last week, and I'm not current on it, I'm completely lost in it. So I would like to see an evolution back to simpler glass, simpler automation, like the Garmin G3X Touch. It does all that. But however you use it, bring it in right from the beginning. We've got it. It's going to be there forever, and the technological evolution is only going to accelerate.
Couldn't disagree more. It's you know, it's like your first 10 hours of training, the pre-solo time. It should be ideally, if I were king, it's like that would be in a champ or a cub off a grass strip till you solo. All the airport environment stuff, talking on the radio, airport markings, glass cockpits, that's all got it. That can all come later. There's a time and a place for it. It's not at the very beginning. And Paul's misguided point about you know, we got to be exposed from the technology first because we're going to fly high technology airplanes. How about a Asiana 777 that is destroyed on landing on a VMC day in calm winds because the pilot doesn't have that sort of stick and rudder training and can't recognize when the auto throttle's not engaged. It's like, regardless of your pursuits in aviation and where you end up, I would love to see that first pre-solo time at a grass strip in a champ.
Even though I'm older than Dave, Dave is living in a fantasy world because flying tail draggers out of grass strips, however fun it is, and that's what I do, is not the real world of flight training. The real world of flight training is in piston airplanes with the wheel in the front, and ground instructors and flight instructors trying to teach the pilot the basics. As Roger pointed out, and I think this is wise, and a real insight for me is your instructors shouldn't be wasting their time doing ground schools. You should turn that over to the kind of technological resources we have today. GIFT is one. They can teach themselves through computer-based or app-based training, and then get them out in the airplane, or better yet, the simulator. Teach them how to fly that way, and as Roger pointed out, you get more knowledgeable pilots, you get fewer failures, and just better competence. If they want to go find a grass strip, hey man, I'm all for it. I love it, but that's not the real world of flight training.
So Paul, you've gotten us into flight training, which is a great place for this group to be. Maybe I'll go back to Dave and ask this. Both the publications in both organizations have focused a lot on flight training. AOPA focused a lot on how to successfully engage in flight training activities years ago. There's going to be awards given this evening again at this event for some of the best in flight training around the country. So we know that there are schools that do a superb job of flight training. What's your perspective, though, as you travel around? Is flight training, particularly in this country, getting better or worse?
I think it's getting better. I think that's reflected in the accident rate, which there are fewer accidents. You people are on the very vanguard of this. I mean, it's like the fact that you're here tells me it's like you want the very best ideas, you wanted the very best information, and you're networking. You're at the very front of that charge, and it's like the tools we've got for flight training are so much better. You know, I think it's you know, it's easy to wax poetic about the old days and you know, pilots of yore were so much better. It's like, I think that's a bunch of nonsense. It's like you know, back when the military was teaching in T6s or SNJs, I mean, they bought left wings by the train load because they were ground looping so many airplanes. You know, we seem to to forget that. It's like there were so many more fatalities in flight training than there are now. You know, our acceptance of the loss rate was higher then, and I think that you know, our acceptance is lower now, and I think that's a healthy thing. That's as it should be.
He completely changed his answer. When we pre-briefed this, Dave was going to be the guy who said that flight training was worse.
That's the way it flies too, by the way.
I'm just keeping you off balance, Paul.
He was the guy who said that flight training was worse, and I was going to be the guy that said it was better, so now I'll say it's worse. Actually, I think there's a portion of it that's worse in that some of the schools, not necessarily the Embry-Riddles, but some of the mid-sized schools and even the local mom-and-pop flight school feel a pressure to get people through the programs so that they can go on to become instructors for 16 hours and then go on to be an airline captain. And as Roger pointed out, it's producing some really terrible candidates. People that just don't have basic flying skills or basic knowledge or basic analytical skills. Dave's right, it has not shown up in the accident rate yet. I'm hoping that it doesn't. So in that context, thus far, through say about 2016 or 2017, we've done a pretty good job because the accident rate is at a historic low level.
The area
we can only hope that it stays that way.
The area in which I would agree with Paul that it's worse is that we're mimicking our schools and we're teaching to the test, and so much of flight training now is, and I'm as guilty of it as anybody because I'm an active instructor, and my focus is usually, all right, student, let's get you through the test. I don't feel a lot of times like I'm helping to create a well-rounded aviator with a broad interest and a love of aviation and all aspects of it. You know, I feel like a lot of times, you know, I'm shortchanging the student by teaching to the test, and that is totally widespread. And I think it's you know, it's symptomatic of a lot of things, but it's like, you know, we've got goal-oriented students, especially now. You know, the Boeing numbers on the demand for professional pilots. People want to become professional pilots. They want to check the box. They want to move on. And it's like, but I think that we as instructors do a disservice to our students when we only teach to the test, and that aspect has certainly got worse.
How do you feel about certain types of aircraft in terms of the training that's involved? Cirrus has made a big commitment to training actually facing some accidents. Icon has made a big really push on training, obviously having faced accidents. Are these responses reasonable, or do we need more type-specific kinds of training in the community?
I think there's several ways to look at it. If you look at the larger ecosystem, and I'll highlight Cirrus here, Cirrus did something that is really fairly astonishing that hasn't gotten the attention it deserves, and that's the Embark program. So that Cirrus had a really seriously bad accident rate when it first appeared. It took them to 2012 to understand it and to tailor and modify their training to improve that, and they have. So now they have a fatal rate that's half what the general aviation fatal rate is. But what they really did that's absolutely admirable is if you buy a used Cirrus, you could be the second owner, the fifth owner, whatever. Cirrus will give you free training in that airplane. It's called Embark. And this is what I call enlightened self-interest. So they're doing two things. They're making that pilot safer. They're reducing the chance of the likelihood in their own exposure to liability and accidents. And I think that's a great thing. I'd like to see other companies do it, and maybe some training organizations to get them involved. I just did some coverage on the Icon. What Icon is doing is pretty good as well. They have a much taller barrier to overcome because they're trying to teach pilots to do one of the most hazardous things, which is to fly low, avoid obstacles, and land on the water. So we are making progress here, but I think there's a ways to go. And most of that is for people in this audience to figure out. And I think, as I said before, embracing the technology You don't have a choice. It's there. You're going to have to do it and figure out a way that integrates it in the most responsible and productive way.
How many people in this group teach in Cirrus aircraft? How many people teach in parachute-equipped aircraft? Okay, really interesting. Yeah, I would echo Paul's comments on the Embark program. I think it's inspired. I think it's brilliant. But it's like what they're doing is they're doing what the industry's has learned a long time ago, and it's type-specific training. And it's like the more type-specific training we get, the better off we'll all be.
So let me go to simulators for a minute. Paul made some generous comments about Redbird, and that's certainly appreciated. But as you've moved around and you've looked at training, and you've thought about the use of simulators, especially in the early phases of flight training, what do you see working or not working? I'll come back to you, Paul.
Well, I don't have a really intimate view of it now because I'm not using a simulator. The last simulator I used, which were great, was a 1960s Lynx simulator, you know, that had the little hood and it spun around in the office of the flight school. And that's when I really discovered how effective simulator training is, because we're just doing approaches and VORs and ILSs and that sort of thing. But for the places I do visit, I think the adherence to any kind of simulator doctrine or any kind of technology-infused doctrine is uneven. And as Roger pointed out, instructors don't like doing it because they're not flying. They want to fly for two reasons. They want to fly and they want to build the hours so they can move on to a higher paying job. Understandable. It's how the industry is just completely bass-ackwards in the way we're structured. And it produces the kind of results we're seeing, which is candidates that are substandard, that are just pushed through. So if I look in this audience, I assume just about everybody here is using simulators in some form, right? Or no? I'm seeing some no's. I'm a real believer in it, and it doesn't matter whether it's motion-based or fixed-based or even a tabletop simulator. These things are all good teaching devices, much better than the cockpit will ever be.
Yeah, I would certainly agree, and it's like the ship has sailed on the value of simulator training. I mean, the airlines use it, the military uses it. We've all seen the benefits there. I would submit that you don't even have to look that far. It's like look at your kids, or I mean, it's like they're playing flight simulator games on their desktop PCs, and when those kids get in an actual airplane, they're terrific. You know, they learn so quickly, and it's like I attribute that largely to their gamers. They've been doing this stuff for years.
I'm going to ask you guys to think a little bit about some of the trends, and I'm thinking, Josh, we might have a little time for some questions from the audience. So maybe if the mics are around, we'll do that in a couple of minutes. But let's talk about, you know, you both are communicators. You're both communicating with different audiences. One of those audiences are people of all ages who are contemplating the notion that they might learn to fly an aircraft. Talk a little bit about how you're thinking about those people today. Who are they? What do you think is going to attract them to us? Maybe Dave, we'll start with you on this.
Yesterday on the way here, I took an Uber on the way here, and I was wearing my AOPA hat with wings on it, and the Uber driver asked if I was a pilot, and I think he was a young guy from India, and man, he just was telling me that his life's mission is to learn to fly. He wants to be a professional pilot, and so when we got here, you know, Redbird was setting up, and he came in, and the folks from Redbird sat him down at the J, and they were showing him this simulator, and English is not his first language, so they were setting him up with, you know, ATC programs and live ATC programs, and how the language and communication piece can fit, and how he can get started on this simulator before he starts his flight training, and how it'll help push him through. And I just thought, I'm going to be riding in the back of his 787 someday, because it's like, you know, and I'm convinced that it's largely genetic. You know, I've got a son and I've got two kids. One of them, when they were infants, an airplane would fly overhead, and one of them would point. You know, the other never looked up. It's like that. It's one's got the flying gene, one doesn't. Doesn't mean I love one of them any more or less than the other one, but it's like it's genetic. There's something internal.
Paul, what do you think about the group out there?
Well, I think Dave is waxing eloquent again. Yeah, it's genetic, but it's also economic. So, and I think that is the major barrier for people learning to fly airplanes. We hope when light sports airplanes came along, it would reduce the cost. It has a little bit, but not substantially. I've had the same experience of introducing people to flying, and they get interested. They probably have the right DNA, but then it becomes that financial impossibility to do. And of course, there are ways to address this, and I think AOPA has done a good job of it in promoting clubs. That's probably the single best way to get people involved in aviation. But otherwise, it's a fairly small clique of people, and for the U.S. domestic piston aviation side, it's not growing, and I'm not really bullish that we found the way to get it there yet.
Well, so you got into the other area I wanted to get into a little bit, which is projecting. You know, we got hit so hard with the recession, 2008, for the next few years, and it took years to come back at all. Economy continues to grow. The health of general aviation, I think, is still pretty fragile. Paul shared a thought. He may have additional ones, but I guess maybe Dave, are you optimistic or pessimistic about where the community's going in the next 5 to 10 years?
You know, I'm not surprisingly optimistic. I think when I look at the landscape, I see that you know, what was killing pilots when I learned to fly, and it was getting lost, running out of gas, controlled flight into terrain, and then and also you know, obviously disorientation in the clouds. You know, we've got answers to just about all of that now. You know, we've got weather, traffic, terrain, moving maps. You know, and I think it's you know, the main killers of pilots have been addressed in some really meaningful ways. I think that the fascination mankind has always had for flight is as strong as ever. Paul rightly points out the financial barriers are high, and when you look at new airplanes, they're getting higher. You know, it's like $1 million piston single. Are you kidding me? You know, I mean, it's like, it's a shock. But it's like there are plenty of you know, I had a friend that just bought a really cherry Cessna 140 for $22,000 last week. So it's like, you know, you don't have to get a brand new $1 million airplane to fly. I think there are ways to do it economically. I know that when I was learning, I did my own sort of scrimping and saving to do it, and as probably most of you in this room did too. And the Uber driver yesterday, I mean, that's what he's obviously a motivated guy. I have no doubt he can overcome the barriers.
I'm not optimistic or pessimistic. I'm realistic, because things that I look at are the number of certified pilots and the number of airplanes we're making. Let's start with the airplanes first. Since about 2009 or 10, basically a decade, we've been making 1,000 piston airplanes a year, and I'm mostly interested in pistons. I think most of us are. We crash more than that. So we're not even replacing the fleet. As far as pilots go, I just looked at the numbers the other day. A decade ago, we had 211,000 private pilots. Now we have about 192 to 193,000. Same trend for commercial pilots. ATPs are up about, I think, 5 or 10% for obvious reasons, because these guys are going to the airlines. mechanics down from, I think it was 329,000 a decade ago down to about 290,000 now. So this is a trend. It's obviously a downward trend. So if you're realistic, you look at that and say, where are the market forces that are going to push that back up? And can you generate those market forces with kind of a supply push? And I don't think you can. It has to come from external factors, and those will be demographic factors. To me, what keeps me from just completely opening a vein on this is that eventually the size of that market will bottom out and it will start to grow again because those demographic factors will change. GA will be very different than it is now because I think that's going to happen in the next 10 to 12 years. And at that point, we're going to be right on the edge of looking into autonomous flight. And when autonomous flight comes along, and you're going to see some announcements within the next couple weeks that are going to shape that, it's really going to begin to change everything. It will be a disruptive change. So I'm realistic about it, not overly pessimistic.
Paul's myopic misinterpretation of the numbers, once again, misses the big picture. He overlooks that there are over 1,000 experimentals being added to the rolls annually, and the underutilization of the airplane fleet that we've got out there. You know, most airplanes, even a lot of the trainers out there, are wildly underutilized. We can get a lot more throughput, even if the existing fleet doesn't grow any more than it's growing now.
I got two more, then we're going to take some from the audience. We've all talked about the 1,500-hour rule. Does it help? Does it hurt? Government overreaction? Appropriate action? Paul?
I thought it was pointless. The motivation behind it was political. And we were talking about this morning. If I were an airline captain or flying anything, I don't care how many hours the guy has. I would want to, if he only had 600 hours, but most of it was flying checks at night over the Rockies in a clapped out 310, that's the guy I want. I don't want a flight instructor who's got 1,200 hours of instructional experience but not a lot of weather experience and has always flown nice airplanes. And I don't know how you get those. It's very difficult to get them because the demand for pilots is so high. So 1,500-hour rule is just a waste of time.
This is one of those rare occurrences where Paul and I agree. 1,500, it's like you could have the same hour 1,500 times, meaningless number. You know, there are plenty of Navy pilots out there, you know, landing a Super Hornet on an aircraft carrier, ready to do anything they're asked to do with about 500 hours of training time. It's all about the quality of the pilot and the quality of the training, and the number is meaningless. I would just extrapolate from that to talk about the quality of the instructors, because I would submit that the quality of the instructors, you know, you can have an inexperienced instructor and an experienced instructor, and it's like how long they've been instructing doesn't necessarily equate to quality or value of the instruction. I've seen plenty of young, new instructors who were fantastic, and I've seen lots of veteran ones that weren't. So, you know, I think the 1,500-hour rule is silly. I think that you know, instructors should be judged individually, and how long they've been doing it doesn't necessarily equate to how good they are at it.
So, final question from me anyway, before I give them a crack at you. If you were to be speaking to a distinguished group of some of the best in the flight training community, which by the way you are, what one wish or suggestion would you make to them to improve the next 5 years in flight training?
Yeah, I think I've already made it with the embrace of the technology. I can't overemphasize that because we're in the midst of a significant sea change. Everyone in this room is feeling it. You can see it. But in aviation, we are so hidebound sometimes. And I'll give you an example of it. When I was learning to fly, I learned to fly in a military club at Fort Bragg. I got cleared to solo, and I was soloing. I hadn't been trained to use the VOR. It was in the panel. I had not been trained to use it because I hadn't gone on any cross countries. I got lost. So I've got this device in here that I don't know how to use. It would have brought me right back to the home field because there was a VOR in the field. And I see that kind of hideboundedness still in aviation. It just goes with the territory. We just got to lose it and just look forward, not back.
Yeah, it's a thought-provoking question. What I would hope for is that we could not teach to the test, that we could develop more well-rounded, inquisitive, thoughtful aviators. You know, I mean, it's like it's almost like a practice. I mean, aviation is lifelong learning. Nobody could possibly master all of it, but it's the pursuit of it that's the reward. And you know, I would just, if I could wave a wand, I would just love to see us as a community produce people who had broad aviation interests, wanted to soak in the knowledge and the history and, you know, just the tremendous achievements that have been achieved already, and project that forward.
Great answers. I'm going to start this by picking on a good friend of mine, John McKenna. John, as probably all of you know, launched some years ago something called the Recreational Aviation Foundation. RAF and AOPA became closely aligned because what we recognized in RAF was a very large group, now national, who has just a passion for flying in the backcountry and a passion for keeping these great strips open around the country. So I saw John sitting here and I thought, well, I wonder how this is resonating with him. They're concerned about safety, they're concerned about flight training, they get pilots into some of the most complicated, complex strips in the planet. What do you think about what you've heard? Or do you have a question for these guys?
Well, this is I don't ever like to pick sides here, but what we tell people is enjoy the passion of aviation, and most of the passion of aviation is out the window. And the people here at Redbird do a great job of providing a simulator. So if you want to look at glass and look at a simulator, buy a Redbird. It's a lot cheaper than an airplane. So I probably fall to the camp of Dave Hirschman, Paul, because I'm more interested in looking out the window than I am at looking at a glass panel as I fly around this great country. And it's served me well for since I was 14 years old, and I'm 66 now. So after 7,000 hours, I'd rather look out the window than look at the panel. We're up to I'm about 10,000.
Thank you. Okay, question back here.
Hi, my name is Pablo Frias-Lamonte. I'm with Richmond Executive Aviation. I started teaching about 11 years ago, right in 2008, right before the financial crisis. When that happened, aviation decided that it wasn't in the cards for me right then and there. I got involved in a major airline safety department for about 8 years, and finally left once the economies to become a pilot were more aligned with my wife and 4 kids. We decided to go ahead and pursue it. But first I had to go flight instructor. I felt I had to go flight instructor to build up the hours to get to a major airline. What I saw being surrounded by guys who had just started teaching, who had just gotten their private pilot certificate probably 12 months earlier, was a stark contrast to what I had learned working 8 years in a safety department at a major airline. And so, since I'm a little bit nervous, I'm new to this first Redbird conference, I actually wrote down my question, and I wanted to pose it and see if you guys could take a crack at it. So, is there a resource out there that provides excellent scenarios that instructors can use in order to train students on aviation risk management and aeronautical decision-making, books, software, etc.? Has anybody written a book with actual scenario? Because you take an instructor who's brand new and they are the touch point with the student. You can have an amazing pilot mill with awesome curriculum, incredible resources, simulators, but if that instructor, I mean, I myself have been sat in front of a Redbird. My checkout was about 15 minutes, learning a couple of the switches and dials, and all of a sudden, I now need to convert this incredibly valuable box to be useful for the student for learning, right, without scenarios. So these resources would be ideal icebreakers for instructors or supervisors and leaders and students that they can use throughout training. Part of what makes a seasoned instructor so valuable is what they have seen in their experience. A brand new instructor, even after their first 500 hours of just trying to stay alive, as we learned last night, is only going to have his or her imagination to draw on in devising good, useful scenarios.
Pilot workshops. Paul and I both, we both work with pilot workshops to produce realistic VFR and IFR scenarios. They're not so much training scenarios, but you know, they're detailed, online, accessible pilot scenarios that I think we can work with. Also, our Air Safety Institute. You know, we have lots of especially video these days. We've got some really in-depth, long-form videos that look at one particular incident, talk to the participants involved, get into their heads of what they're thinking at each stage, and really what that does is it's a terrific replacement for the hangar flying that used to take place. You know, you know, when I was learning to fly, it was easy to soak up wisdom of veteran pilots because they were there and they'd be drinking coffee or something stronger, and they would tell stories, and you'd learn to think like a pilot from being around these veteran aviators. And so the format's changed, the delivery system is different, but that's what companies like Pilot Workshops are trying to replicate.
Paul?
Yeah, I agree. And that scenario training is not limited to a third party like Pilot Workshops. Training institutions are beginning to incorporate it too. And the FAA has gotten behind it and suggested it as a good training paradigm. And that certainly does help, but you still have to go out and do it. You have to set it up, and you have to have some kind of instructional framework, and it doesn't have to be a person. And that instructional framework leads the pilot through that decision-making process. Because if you look at a lot of the accidents, and I look at thousands of them, they almost all begin with bad decision-making. A mistake was made at the beginning, the chain starts, doesn't get broken, you have an accident.
And I would just like to applaud you and your tenacity and grit for sticking with this for, you know, throughout all this adversity. I think that's amazing. Way to go.
In fact, I thought the question was so well written that maybe there's an opportunity for a guest columnist for Flight Training Magazine. So.
There we go.
Who else? There's one back there.
Yeah, hello. My name's Trevor Evans. I represent Redbird's products in Southeast Asia. And I was just going to get your take on a couple of things. You know, in Europe, they have this MPL license now where they put people through a training course to make them airline pilots by actually having them go through series of, I think they only do about 70 hours in an actual airplane. Everything else is done in simulators. And they come out and they're basically a first officer or whatever for the airline. Now in Asia, the whole place is mixed up because they followed JAA, which was the Joint Aviation Authority. That's how they kind of did all their licensing. And when EASA took over, they basically excluded anybody from that wasn't a European Union member from joining JAA. So what you have is a mishmash of them adopting all sorts of different standards. So what you get in Asia right now is you get this situation where some of the places are allowing people to just simply do a commercial pilot license with no multi-engine rating at all. They actually do it in a 172. They consider a 172 a complex airplane. And then they go straight into doing a type rating with about 300 hours in a Airbus, mostly it's Airbuses there. And they go straight into an A320 type rating, and they come out as a first officer with about 300 hours, and they get issued a multi-engine rating when they come out of that. Now, one of the problems with that is that, just from my experience, one of the airlines there in Southeast Asia, when they bought a number of aircraft, they were given free type ratings. So they sent their airline cadets off to Toulouse to do training. And what happened is the whole batch was sent back because they were so far behind the airplane. And so what those schools have started doing is buying, or what these academies are doing, are buying Redbirds particularly their jet sims like the Citation Mustang and things. And so what they're doing is putting them through a whole jet FAM course in that, and then they've been passing the type ratings. But do you ever see a situation where the U.S. might end up for a shortage of pilots with the 1,500-hour rule now because of the cost of actually doing all that training? Do you think that it would ever be a situation where they would go or copy that MPL license? And what's your opinion of the MPL license?
You know, I think it depends entirely on the quality of the training program and how it's conducted. And I would give the example of Lufthansa. You're probably familiar with Lufthansa. They've had an ab initio program forever, and as far as I know, they've had good success with it. When we looked at those pilot demands for pilots and technicians and all the rest of it going ahead 10, 20 years, there's a lot of demand push there, and if the economics of the industry don't provide these pilots, then yeah, you have to turn to some creative solution like that. Philosophically, if you can make it work and you can get the output candidate to perform, I have no problem with it. But that's the trick. And in Asia, as you pointed out, they've had mixed success with this. Some of that I think is cultural, some of it's economic, some of it's technological. But why not? I mean, we don't have to continue to do things the way we have been just because we did them that way.
Yeah, I really don't have an informed opinion on the topic. It's something that it's a concept I've read about, but have very little hands-on experience with. I will say, however, that I recently finished a pretty state-of-the-art typewriting course. It was my very first jet typewriting course, single pilot typewriting course. And at the end of that course, I've got the certificate. I am legal to fly this plane. I am in no way ready to fly this plane by myself. I get out to the actual airplane and can't figure out how to open the door. The training itself was fine. It was made to pass the check ride. I held up my end. I passed the check ride. In no way am I.
How many airline pilots in here? Have any of you ever done a type rating in the airplane? No. And that ended, what, 25 years ago?
Yeah,
the last time I remember seeing it,
apples and oranges.
I used to fly charters down to Atlantic City, and TWA was still in business of training out there. They used to do touch and goes in 737s, but those days are long gone.
One more. Okay, guys, you get the final word. One wrap up.
I just want to say a heartfelt thank you. I come from a family of educators, and to me, there's nothing more noble than the work that you do to train the next generation of pilots, and I just want to say thanks.
Yeah, the fact that you're here says a lot about your character and interest and dedication to the industry, and you probably form the top 1% of that group of instructors and training institutions that are the best. Now, what you have to figure out is how to percolate it down through the rest of the industry.
Join me in thanking Paul and Dave for a great presentation. The best of the best. Thank you, guys. Let me ask to hop up on stage. We're done. Thank you. Thanks. Charlie Gregoire. Charlie is one of the great leaders of Redbird. He's been there, I think, since the beginning, one way or another. And he has a few words about what comes next in the program. Charlie.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. Thanks, guys. That was awesome. I realize I am the one thing standing between break time, restroom for most of you, so I'm going to make this quick. It's time to talk about the much loved by some, much lauded by others, Migration Challenge. For those of you who've been to Migration before, we do these things mostly for our entertainment, to see you squirm and to see you do it. And so here I am to introduce the Migration Challenge. Real quick, before we roll this next piece, everybody look at the back of your registration badge, and there's a number written on it. That will be your team number. There are other people around with that same number, find them. That's the team you're going to be working with. Later today, when we break for the challenge, on the tables there will be number placards so that you know where to gather to find your teammates if you haven't found them for the day so far. So without further ado, the migration challenge.
We set sail on this new theme because there is new knowledge to be gained and new rights to be won, and they must be won and used for the progress of all people. And it is one of the great adventures of all time. Its hazards are hostile to us all. Its conquest deserves the best of all mankind, and its opportunity for peaceful cooperation may never come again. Our obligations to ourselves, as well as others, all require us to make this effort, to solve these mysteries, to solve them for the good of all men. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept. Therefore, as we set sail, we ask God's blessing on the most hazardous and dangerous and greatest adventure on which man has ever embarked. Thank you.
Okay, so your challenge is to plan a flight. I'm sorry, I missed a couple of words in there. Plan a flight from Earth, Texas to Moon, Pennsylvania. Now, there's some caveats here. Number one, you must plan for a crew of 3 to leave Moon, Pennsylvania and travel at least 90% of that journey together. Only 2 crew members can touch down in Moon, though, and bonus points will be given. Well, that is a problem with the slide. Sorry about that. Bonus points will be given if you can figure out how to keep the 3rd person airborne while the other 2 touch down in Moon, Pennsylvania. You must purchase and use exactly 3 different aircraft. It could be any aircraft you want, but you have to figure out how to purchase it. You have $5 million. But it is a government program, so feel free to spend accordingly. You must incorporate your wild card. Now, when you come back for the migration challenge, at your table with your number, we'll come around with little red envelopes. In each one of those envelopes is a wild card. They're all different. Some are easy, some are not so easy. It's the luck of the draw. But you'll understand when you see it. The wild card will have a special instruction that you have to incorporate into your flight. And you must have your plan submitted before 3:30 p.m. today. Now, what are we submitting? We need to submit a detailed flight log, an image of the proposed route of flight, a detailed description of your plan, a detailed budget, aircraft details. You can see details. This is the aircraft details, including support for your proposed purchase price. So you find a link on controller, trade a plane, something like that, something to support the purchase price that you're putting against the airplane that you're using. Any other relevant or, quite frankly, irrelevant supporting materials you'd like to include in your submission. And you get bonus points if you design a mission patch as well. So there'll be a submission for that. You must fill out Form 1923-01R, which has been delivered to your email. So right now, if you check your email, everyone will have a link that has a submission form. That's the form you're going to fill out when you actually make your submission, and by 3:30 p.m. it'll come. Then we'll start the judging. What are the judging criteria? Adherence to the rules and the theme, of course. Likelihood of success, you're going to get bonus points for that. Creativity, more details the better. Details. And bonus points are awarded by the judges at their sole discretion for any reason that they might want to award bonus points. So, just so you know who the judges are, Paul, Julie Boatman, new editor-in-chief of Flying Magazine, Paul Bertorelli, AvWeb, Dave Hirschman, and Roger Sharp. So look around the room. I don't know if they can be bought or not. The 102-47-11 award, which is the closest to the target time en route. Again, 102 hours, 47 minutes, and 11 seconds. The Bean Counter Award, which is your closest to your assigned budget of $5 million. And then the sort of the wild card, the Judge's Choice, the Right Stuff Award. But that's not it. Tonight, all 4 award winners will get a chance to pitch their idea to the rest of the migration conference for a chance to win the mystery grand prize. You're doing it live. It's a 3-minute live pitch. You will be told that you're an award winner prior to the dinner, so you can get together and start working on your pitch. And migration will decide. The rest of the attendees will vote on it. There's a voting portion in the app that will. So convince migration that that's what we're doing. That's it. That's the migration challenge. Start thinking about how you're going to do that. Get together with your teammates when at the time in the agenda, you'll see it says migration challenge. You have about an hour there, but then you can continue to work on it for the rest of the day. For right now, we're going to go off to a quick break, and then we're going to the breakout sessions. If you look at your agenda, you'll find a number of great breakout sessions in the rooms behind me and up on the mezzanine as well. If you have any questions, see any of the folks, the Redbird folks, and we'd be happy to guide you in the right directions. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Wings Over the Rockies hangar speaking to you. We have additional restrooms.